Today, I would like to talk about sorrow. Last month, it was 2 years ago that I lost my husband, Eberhard, the father of my children. He died. Last month was also when I started thinking about this talk. What was I going to tell you? It proved a complicated combination, the second anniversary of my husband's death, and writing a talk. Poor timing. So poorly timed that, in all honesty, I just could not think of what I was going to say on this stage. My thoughts were hijacked by other things. Memories, images. The second anniversary of my husband's death was approaching, and I kept seeing my youngest child's toes. Those toes, stuffed in sneakers, whose noses were scuffed because he kept using them as brakes to slow down his bicycle. The same toes he stood on 2 years ago to give his father, who was lying in his coffin, a kiss. For he had not been tall enough yet to reach him. It were these types of images that crowded my brain and filled me with sadness for most of September and October. That had not been my intention. My plan had been to spend most of September and October by opening my laptop in the mornings and writing an inspiring talk with facts, numbers, quotes, jokes. The type of talk that would leave you saying, "What a remarkably wise woman." But try as I might, I did not generate facts, numbers, quotes, let alone jokes. I generated absolutely nothing. In fact, I did not even open my laptop. Instead, I had conversations with my best friend Sam that went something like this. "What is that in your ears?" "I don't know." "It's black." "I don't know." "It looks weird." Back at home in the mirror, I saw what it was. Mascara. Earlier that day, I had cried so hard, lying on my back, that all my mascara had run into my ears. They were black. And truth be told, it did look weird. This was not a wise woman staring back at me from the mirror. This was someone who was at a loss. And so that is what this has become. A TED talk on sorrow given by someone who is at a loss. And maybe that's just what it should be. During the last 2 years, I noticed, from response to my columns on grief, for instance, is that I touched people by sharing my struggles with sorrow, that they found it recognizable, that there is a need for more stories about pain, stories about the less rosy sides of life. We seldom share our pain, while we all experience it. We often deal with sadness alone. How sad is that? It took me a while to get the hang of it, sharing my sorrow. I can still picture myself sometime last year on my bicycle, on my way to a coffee date with my friend Sam. I had woken up very early that morning. And before I had even opened my eyes, I felt the absence of Eberhard's arm. Literally, I missed his arm. And to be more exact, I missed that spot between his shoulder and his biceps, that little hollow, the part of his upper arm in which my head fit, in which my head belonged. And I missed it so much, it hurt. I missed it so much that I fled out of bed and started my day way too early, just to not feel the pain. And I kept on fleeing until it was time for my coffee date. But when I locked my bicycle, my ear, once again, felt that hollow in his upper arm. And I started to cry in the middle of the street. Well, not really in the middle of the street. I stood against the wall as much out of sight as possible, and with my head down, I cried and felt ashamed of my tears. So when my friend arrived, that was the first thing I said. I apologize for my tears. I'm sorry that I'm crying while you thought we were going to have coffee together and enjoy each other's company. I'm sorry. But after all the sorries, behind a cup of coffee, out poured the rest. About his upper arm, about how lonely I felt, about how afraid I was that I would never recover. We seldom allow ourselves to tell our stories. I think that has to do with being vulnerable, with fearing the judgment of others. I would rather that the people around me see me as happy and fun than as someone who is weak or struggling with doing things on her own. Even I would rather not see myself that way. And it took me a while to get the hang of it, sharing my sorrow, to not answer the question of, how are you, with an automatic, fine, and you? I was so used to saying that I was fine. I even answered this the day after my husband's funeral. Looking back on the text messages I sent that day, it almost seems as if it'd been an ordinary Sunday. I'm fine, I took it easy today. We went outside for a while. I'm cooking pasta right now. But of course, I wasn't fine at all. Yes, we went outside that day, but what I don't say is that it was to visit his grave, the place where we had to leave him the previous day. I don't see that in any of my messages. And I certainly don't read about how the trip over there had been. It had been the day of the Amsterdam marathon, and the whole city had been cordoned off. And we had tried to get to Eberhard, but it had proven almost impossible. Every few feet we were stopped by traffic controllers or crowd barriers. He had become unreachable. I don't see that in any of my messages. I didn't send any message saying how lonely I felt, or about what went through my mind when I was stuck at an intersection with my 3 children, unable to get them to their father. Sometimes it's easier to simply lie and say that you are doing fine than to share how lonely you are. And not only has this something to do with being vulnerable, it also has to do with daring to claim space. If I tell someone I'm feeling sad, this places expectations on them. While a fine can be filed away, great, she's doing fine, let's move on, and I'm feeling sad cannot be ignored. How are you? I'm feeling sad. Oh, okay. I think I'll have the carpet cleaner come over. That stain is driving me crazy. And I'm feeling sad requires attention. But who am I to ask that of someone? I can cope. I always have. And I've seen others do it too. How are you? I'm fine. But I was not coping. There were moments when all I could feel was, he's dead. gone. Moments that I was filled with pain and missing and sadness, so filled with it, I overflowed. And you could almost call it luck, that my sorrow was so overwhelming that I had no choice but to share it. Because that allowed me to experience what sharing can do for you. And when I talked to my friend Sam about the upper arm, she did the one thing I needed her to do. The only thing that could console me. She listened. I talked and she listened. And that is how we connected. We seldom allow ourselves to tell our story. But when I share my pain, I expose myself. And it might be the part of me with mascara in her ears, but that is me too. And though it fills me with fear to show that side, by doing so, I allow a real connection to come about. And that connection chips away at the solitude of my sorrow. I can still feel the pain. I can still feel the absence for that hollow in his upper arm, for instance. But when I share my sorrow, then, for a while at least, I am not alone. And this connection works both ways. Sharing your pain is not only good for yourself, also for the other. Sharing sorrow creates space. Space for the other to tell their story, to expose themselves. It's infinitely easier to show your vulnerable side to someone who is doing the same. Look, I'm broken too. Here, for instance, and here. By sharing your sorrow, you give the other the space, the safety to do the same. And one thing is sure, the other is sad too. Everyone carries a sadness in them. So I learned to share my sorrow, and it helped. But what I was also doing was waiting for things to go back to normal, waiting for my sorrow to go away. Because this was no way to live, waking up to missing hollows in upper arms. I wanted to go back to who I had been before. But it is a painful misconception that sorrow or loss is something you recover from. It took me a while to figure out that sorrow is not something that has to be dealt with, that you can actually live with sorrow. A funny thing really that was something I had to learn. Feeling sad is normal, human. Yet sometimes it seems as if we are afraid of it. And it's normal not to want to feel pain, to try to push it away. I did this myself night after night as I tucked in my middle child. Good night, I love you. And then I would see her pull up her blanket, the soft blanket. The blanket her father had lain under when he passed away. The blanket she had dragged to her bed the day after he died. The blanket she clung to. And as I went downstairs, I would feel the pain well up in my belly and in my chest. But instead of welcoming it, I would push it away. I did not want to feel my sorrow. And to help myself avoid it, I would fill my head with other things, like whether or not I wanted to empty the dishwasher now, maybe tomorrow, whether I would like to try on those pens I saw in the shop, whether I had an opinion on the functioning of the European Central Bank. I literally tried everything. We push away our sorrow in order to go on living. And if we don't succeed in doing so, we go to a therapist, or we take pills, but they all boil down to the same thing. We want to deal with it, fix it. The pain has to go so we can go back to being who we once were, back to living our lives. But things only started to get better once I didn't push my sorrow away and gave it space. Once I welcomed my sorrow. My sorrow for the girl who sleeps under the blanket that had covered her father. My sorrow over the missing of upper arms. My sorrow for the boy who had to stand on his toes. I welcomed my sorrow. And by God did it hurt. In my belly, and in my chest, and in my throat. All the way up to my ear that didn't feel his arm anymore. And then I cried, and cried, and cried. Until it started to subside. Until it didn't hurt anymore. Until my sorrow had been let out and I felt a little lighter. And it was only once I started doing that I understood the purpose of sorrow, what it is meant to do. Sorrow allows you to say goodbye when you don't want to. It shapes the sadness that has been caused by loss, allowing you to release it. And this could be the loss of someone you love, to death or to the ending of a relationship. But it could also be the loss of a job or a dream you had for yourself. You feel sorrow because you have been separated from someone or something you love. And it's very valuable to be able to feel this. Yes, being separated hurts. Saying goodbye when you don't want to hurts. Sorrow hurts. But wouldn't it be awful if we weren't able to feel it? I am sad. I feel pain. And that allows me to express my loss, my separation. And what I get in return is connection. I feel connected with the people around me. By telling others about my sorrow, I allow them to tell me about theirs. And I heard stories about illness and death and broken hearts and loneliness. In short, about being human. And that has changed me too. For instance, it helps me to view others with more empathy. I no longer see people as moody or difficult or bitter. I know there is a story behind it. I hope we take the time to ask them about it. I will never become the person I once was. And it doesn't matter. I'm now a woman with mascara in her ears. A woman who feels sorrow. And I wanted to share this sorrow with you this morning. I wanted to tell my story in the hopes it helps others to tell theirs, to share their sorrow. Because it's part of life, sorrow. It makes us human. So please allow yourself to feel it. Thank you.